All right, everybody. So I put together 7 rides from the last couple days, and it almost appears that Uber has yet again maybe reduced our pay. I don't know what's going on, and there's going to be some important caveats to this entire process of examining these particular rides. Uh, but there's several things I want people to pay attention to. Number one is pay attention to how far I'm being asked to drive to pick people up. This tells you something, or at least it tells me something, that there are not a lot of drivers out there driving for some reason, or Uber is trying to steer drivers into certain areas, which we all know they do that. But that being said, I think there's a couple things that affect this this I want to say pattern of being asked to drive really far distances to pick people up. I think that whole wait and save feature is part of it. You know, there may be drivers in the area, but if Uber can do a wait and save, if the passenger does a wait and save ride, Uber doesn't care how far somebody has to drive to pick them up. Okay. And because of that, we used to get the long distance pickup fees. They would juice that pay just a little bit to entice you to drive. But in order to get rid of that, they've introduced this wait and save. And if they can get a passenger to voluntarily wait to save a couple dollars, that's money that they don't have to pass on to the driver, and they don't care when the driver shows up. You know, that whole wait and save feature, that tells Uber that the passenger doesn't care how long it takes to get picked up. They just need to get picked up eventually. So I want to look at that. I want to look at how far we're being asked to drive. And I want to look at how far the actual trip is, and then what the mileage is, and then what the pay is. And it appears that with that, I mean, I think it's the AI system that Uber's using. It's really narrowing in where it can save money, which when it saves money, it makes money for the corporation. And we're going to go over all these rides. So go ahead and stay tuned. We're going to go through these one by one, and we're going to analyze it, and we're going to look at what the pay per mile was, not including driving to that passenger. But then we're going to look at that magic number, which as drivers, we really need to pay attention to. It's one thing if you're only driving a mile down the road to pick somebody up, okay? It's a totally different thing when you're being asked to drive 10, 15 miles to pick somebody up, to take them another 10, 15 miles, and the pay is so low. When you start looking at that overall number, the pay drops considerably on a per mile basis. And I think that's something that every driver out there should be aware of. I'm not saying take these rides, don't take these rides. I personally did not take these rides. I'm not trying to tell people what to do. I'm trying to tell you that you need to be aware of these things. And these are all things that every single one of us should think long and hard about. And it should go into our calculation. You hear me talk about, come up with a plan. All this should be incorporated into your plan so that when it does pop up and it does happen to you, you know how to react, and you already know in your mind, yeah, I'll take those rides, or no, I won't take those rides, and you can make the decision then. So, all right, so with that being said, we're going to jump into this and we're going to start analyzing these rides. All right, so we're going to go through this ride by ride. Just to give everybody a little bit of a backstory on how I'm doing this, I'm using the free version of ChatGPT. I just asked a simple question, which was go ahead and calculate, the pay per mile trip only and the pay per mile including pickup and drop. And then I took the screen captures and I put them into the ChatGPT, and ChatGPT did the rest. So we're going to look at ride one. The pay was $16.55.
make this a little bit smaller. This is not about me in any way, shape, or form. So the pay was $16.55. The pay per mile total, if you count it was a short pickup, 0.6 of a mile. It was a long trip, 21 miles. You may as well round it up to 21 miles. And then you got to drive back. Keep that in mind too. But we're not talking about that. So we're just talking about this. And the pay per mile, right here, was 79 cents a mile when you calculate in the pickup. The pay per mile with just the trip was only 81 cents. So even that is not worth it in any way, shape, or form, in my opinion. Again, you guys and girls, you make your decisions based on what you need to do. But in my opinion, I don't think 81 cents a mile is worth driving. That's a little bit too low. It needs to be closer to $1, if not more than $1. All right, so we're going to move on to ride 2. And again, and this seems to be an overall pattern with Uber, is this pay per mile when you total in driving to that person. If you look at this, 7.5 miles, driving to them is the same distance as what the drop off is. And when you calculate that in, it's only 72 cents a mile. That's actually less than the tax write-off of 72.5 cents a mile. And you take that out of the equation, and you're up at $1.43 a mile. And that's what Uber likes to do. They like to say, okay, well, we're paying them $1.43 a mile to drive. And that's all fine and dandy, but as drivers, we have to think about more than just driving to the drop-off. We have to also think about driving to pick the passenger up from time to time too. You don't have to do that in every single situation. These rides where you're only driving, a mile and a half, maybe 2.5 miles at most to pick that person up, you can sometimes ignore that a little bit here and there. I wouldn't ignore it all the time, but you can sometimes get over that and say, okay, it's this looks like it's $1.50 a mile, $1.40 a mile. You go ahead and do it, and just kind of take the wash on the other. All right, so now we're on to ride 3, and again, short pickup, 2.5 miles. Total pay for this ride is only $18.48, but you're driving 21.2 miles, which we all know a lot of these rideshare apps like to calculate that mileage on the low side in the beginning. I mean, chances are this ride's closer to 22 miles. So you're looking at a total trip of 23.7 miles. If you include all the mileage, it's 78 cents a mile. If you just look at the drop-off miles, it's 87 cents a mile. So that's not much better. That's very, very low. And again, this is your decision as a driver. My job is to tell you, hey, and remind you, hey, these are things that you need to think about when you're out there driving and when you're creating a plan to drive. Or if you're thinking about, maybe you're not an Uber driver, you just caught this video because you're researching it and you're thinking about being an Uber driver, keep in mind this is the pay that you're getting. This right here is the pay that you're getting. So think twice, 3 times, maybe even 4 times about getting into it. Don't get me wrong, we have our really good days, but more often than not, we're seeing more and more offers that are very low like this, and I think that something needs to be done about it. I really do. I don't know what the answer is. Maybe write your congressman, your congresswoman, your senator, get in touch with your local government representatives and really say, hey, point this out. Say, hey, look, we're not even making enough money to pay any taxes. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about that? There's a lot of Uber drivers out there that we could be contributing to the tax base, and we're not because we're not getting paid enough to do so. Ride 4, $12.46. Pickup, 8.1 miles. It's longer than the 7.7 mile trip for $15. Uber would be real quick to say, hey, we're paying you $1.62 a mile. But in reality, and they're paying you that $1.62 a mile. But in reality, you're actually, if you calculate the pickup miles and then the drop off miles, the total trip is 15.8 miles. You're not even making 80 cents a mile. Okay, and I know that the federal government says that your standard mileage deduction is 72.5 cents per mile. And there's a lot that goes into that 72.5 cents per mile. Okay, keep this in mind. There's a lot that goes into it. A big portion of that is is how it devalues your vehicle. Okay, I don't like to calculate that in for the simple fact that my vehicle is a tool. I use it for work. I don't really care what it's worth at the end of 5, 6, 7 years. Okay, I put aside money every week to save to maintain the vehicle, and I usually don't spend all that money in a year. I don't even come close most of the time. So for me, like I said, I've been doing it a long time. For me, it's always been a success, and it's been profitable. But not everybody has those same results. You may get a lemon of a vehicle. You may have more problems than most people. You may not drive like me. I drive a car very, very soft. So these are all things that you as a driver have to take into consideration. And if you want to calculate the depreciation of the vehicle in, which the federal government does at the 72.5 cents a mile, then yes, absolutely, you're losing money on these trips. I personally do not, and I know I'm going to catch flack from people saying that I'm calculating wrong, but at the end of the day, I drive my cars for a long time. I drive them soft, and I save money every week for things that I end up don't spending money on, and I use that to get in my next vehicle. Not everybody can do that. I've had one bad experience, and I learned a lot from it early on, and I've kind of stuck to that. So I've stuck to that, $50 to $100 a week for maintenance and saving for the vehicle. But again, 79 cents a mile versus $1.62 for just the trip up, the drop off. But in reality, you're driving this whole, so the pay per mile, you're really only making 80 cents a mile if you want to count your depreciation, which if you are a part-time driver, you ought to count your depreciation. All right, so now we're going to move on to ride 5, $10.92. Again, we're right at that 79 cents a mile when you calculate both of them in. And this is not by accident. This is definitely calculated by Uber's AI. They know that drivers are saying, okay, 70 to 80 cents is the minimum I'll drive for. And I think that a lot of drivers are willing to drive for that. The total mile, if you just do, not totals, if you do the drop-off miles, okay, just for the trip, it's $1.88, and you think to yourself, wow, that's really good. And that's not bad. But at the end of the day, you got to calculate up here this pickup, driving to the pickup, 8.1 miles. I didn't want to drive that far to pick somebody up. I think that's a little ridiculous. You cannot tell me that there was not a closer driver, okay? But what they did, the AI system looked at this. It was probably a wait and save ride, who knows? But even if it wasn't, they took a gamble and said, okay, let's see if we can do a match request and one of those trip radar match requests, and maybe we can save a little bit of money on this and add it to our profits. And I have no doubt in my mind that's probably what they did. All right, so here we are. This one is very, very low. For ride 6, it was $14.81. The pickup miles was 10.5 miles, which we all know is probably 11 for a 14-mile trip. Total miles 24. Calculating the total miles, you're making 61 cents a mile. That is hard, absolutely hard. If you're out there driving, I strongly suggest that you Number one, I've said it before, you have to track your miles. No doubt about it, you have to track your miles. Number two, pay very, very close attention to the total trip. Look at these miles here. More and more, I'm seeing these long distance pickups, and Uber used to pay you a little bit of money for these long distance pickups. Since I would say right around November, maybe around Thanksgiving, is when things really started to shift and pay, I felt like, started to drop. And it looks like it's dropped between 15 and 25%. I mean, I'm not a mathematician. These are just rough numbers that I'm running in my little peanut shaped head that works so well. I really feel like it's about a 25 to 15% decrease in pay, what we're seeing. This was all through since Thanksgiving, December into January, close to the end of the first week of January. I felt like pay went back up a little bit. I was getting some really good offers. I was excited to be back out there and driving because I felt like I was being paid a little bit more. And then all of a sudden, it just started dropping again. This weekend, now the end of the first week, the pay has dropped back down. These are I'm showing them to you now, to the point where I actually turned Uber off and only drove Lyft. And I generally don't like to drive Lyft, but yeah, pay on Lyft was so much better. I was like, you know what? I'm not even going to turn Uber on, and I just drove Lyft. So let's move on to ride number 7, our last ride. Again, here we are at this magic number that Lyft likes so much, these 70 in the 70 cents range. That's pathetic. Okay, when you calculate the total miles, it's coming out at 70 cents a mile. That's less than the 72.5 cents a mile. I mean, if you really wanted to be technical and just go by the numbers, you are paying Uber to do this trip. You're paying them 2.5 cents a mile to do the trip. Okay? I don't know about you. I don't want to pay Uber to do anything. There's no doubt about it. There's been some type of shift, and it's lowered again. 15 to 25% is what it's looking like to me. And it's just not worth it. The total miles driven, if I've done any of these rides, I did none of these rides. These were all just screen captures. I turned every single one of them down. I wouldn't do them. 70 cents a mile is a little bit too low. It's at least 35 cents light per mile. Even if you just look at the trip only, most of the time, if you scroll back up here, these trip onlys, you were looking at $1.62, $1.88. There was one up here for 87, $1.43. But if you look at the trip only on this ride, it was only 76 cents a mile. That is barely enough, according to the federal government, to drive the vehicle. And when you look at that 72.5 cents a mile, keep in mind that is designed to encompass all cars. Okay, your car and your situation with the price of your insurance, what you're paying for the car, if you had a higher than normal interest rate, whatever it may be, your cost may be higher than that 72 cents a mile. Your cost may be up around 79 cents a mile, 81 cents a mile. So knowing your true costs is very important in this too. And I'll go ahead and I'll kind of explain that a little bit at the end of this video, and maybe that can help some people too. So keep watching and, maybe take some notes if you don't already know how to do it. I think a lot of people do, but I'll go over it anyway. Total rides, this would have paid $107. Pick up 40, trip miles 107, total combined miles 148. So let's see real quick if did ChatGPT actually do it. Well, I'll just do it now. 148 miles, 0.1 times 72.5. All right. So there you go. Total pay would have been $107.85. You'd have made $107. It would have cost you $107.37 if you calculate everything with the mileage deduction. Now, granted, that's not money coming directly out of your pocket, but if you're doing this part time and you need to save you need to save as much equity into your vehicle over a 5 or 6, 7 year period, so that when you go to get a new one, you're okay. Then driving Uber is not the gig for you. It's Uber as a side gig is really not that beneficial to people anymore. It used to be, don't get me wrong, it used to be, but I don't think it is anymore. The reason it's not anymore is cars have become too expensive, number one. Even used cars have become very expensive. The maintenance has become very expensive on all of these cars. So when you talk about maintenance and things like that, you're spending so much and you're losing so much on the value of your vehicle that unless you're doing it and you're treating your car as a tool and you're able to save that $50 to $100 every week, it is not worth doing, in my opinion, as a side gig. Is it worth doing as a full-time thing? Excuse me. Yes, I think it is. It's barely, worth doing at that point, and it's gotten worse. But it still can be done. All right. So here are some of what ChatGPT says is the clear takeaway from this is Uber appears to pay about $1 per mile. Let's see, but when you include required unpaid pickup miles, that pay drops to 73 cents. Okay? Pickup miles reduced earnings by 27% in this situation. So just driving to pick people up reduced the pay by 27%. That's crazy. That's something, I mean, I think of that, but to think of it from this aspect, that it reduced my pay by 27%, I've never thought of it like that. So, this is why I love ChatGPT, is it just pointed something out that I, who've been doing this almost 12 years, have never thought about the percentage of how it reduces my pay. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I've thought about how it reduces pay, but I've never looked at it like this, and it kind of just was a big eye opener for me, to be very honest with you. 27% is a lot. Strong video, blah, blah, blah. ChatGPT is telling me this would make a strong video. That's funny. Yeah, it would, wouldn't it? All right. So that being said, like I said, let's talk about how, and we'll just run over this real quick. If you want to try and calculate your cost directly, what it costs you to drive, an easy way to do it is to take, I would say, here's how you do it. Take what you pay in insurance every month, take what you pay for your car every month, take your average weekly gas, add all those up, then add at least $100 to that, because that $100 is going to go towards maintenance that you want to save. Okay? And then divide that number by the number of days each week that you generally and on average that you drive. So, let's say you add all that up. We'll do a quick, where did it go? All right, we will do a quick example here. Let's say you spend, I don't know what a car payment is, $600 plus, let's say you tell them you do Rideshare, so you're paying close to $200 a month. Plus, let's just say you spend $100 a week on fuel. You probably spend more, but we'll say $400. So that's $1,200. And let's say you're going to drive 20 days a month. you're going to shoot for 60 bucks a day just to cover your costs. That's your general cost right there. All right. Then divide that. Then you take the miles and you divide that into the miles, and you can kind of get an idea of what you have to drive for. How much you need to drive, what you're going to need to make for each mile that you drive. And that's pretty much it. You can go into ChatGPT and type all that information in, tell them exactly what kind of car you drive, what your average pay. Give it as much information as you can, and it'll spit out a pretty decent game plan for you, and you can go from there. All right. Well, hopefully this video, like I said, it feels like it's about a 15 to 25% pay cut. And I hope this video, opens some people's eyes. I'm not telling people go and drive for Uber and Lyft. Don't drive Uber and Lyft. Don't do rideshare. That's not what I'm here to do. I personally like driving Uber and Lyft. I like meeting the people. I like the amount of money that I make. I wish I made a little bit more, but for the most part, I'm happy. But I would love to make more. So I'm not out here telling people don't do it. I'm telling people educate yourself to try and maximize how much you make. Maybe save some money here or there. Maybe get an extra $10 tip every week. Whatever it is, there's always room for improvement. And I hope that's what people take away from these videos. And I really hope it helps somebody. So go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you like this kind of content. Smash that like button, and by all means, please leave a comment. I love hearing all the comments. Good, bad, or indifferent, leave your comment. I generally try to respond to every single one of them. And I'll see everybody out on the road. I hope you get out there and make some really good money. Have a great weekend.